Welcome to the 32nd episode of Speaking of Poetry. I am Rennie McQuilkin, publisher of Antrim House Books, whose authors are featured in this series. I am delighted to be joined today by Danny Dover, one of Vermont's finest poets. He is the author of Tasting Precious Metal and Kindness Soup, Thankful Tea. Danny's poems have appeared in Blue Line and many issues of Bloodroot Literary magazine. In 2013, he was a Pushcart nominee. He received his BA from Antioch College in 1971 and also holds associate degrees in surveying technology and keyboard technology. What a fascinating career he has had. Danny was the piano technician at Dartmouth College for 17 years and continues servicing pianos part-time. Previously, he worked as a folk singer, contradance musician, dulcimer maker, foundry pattern maker, surveyor, and gold miner. I'm fairly breathless. Having visited Nepal on many occasions, Danny serves on the board of Hands in Outreach, a small nonprofit group coordinating educational sponsorships for Nepalese children. In the wake of the recent earthquake in Nepal, his work is more important than ever. Welcome to Speaking of Poetry, Danny Dover.
Thank you, Rennie. Thank you for that marvelous introduction. I'm not so sure about the gold mining part, but we'll let that slide. Maybe someday I will be. I'm going to start with a poem about my ancestry. It's called My People. My New York clan were short, solid stock, cut close to the ground by the wars of Europe. Their bubbly voices fizzing like seltzer in overheated apartments, ambitions stored away with musty dress suits. Uncle Phil strumming in a mandolin orchestra, Uncle Meyer's meager grocery and Yiddish poems, tiny chain-smoking Aunt Fika primping wavy salt and pepper hair, and Uncle Sal who fled Germany before the war. These were my people, my ports of call, riding the wild seas of the 60s, who taught of times you must make yourself invisible to survive. Uncle Sal, through misty spectacles, staring past my chin into the face of 1937 Berlin. The Nazis are coming. You'll see, Sal chanted. You'll see. You'll see. Color Wars. I am a veteran of the color wars of Lakeville, Connecticut YMCA camp in the year mile-high bombs bloom in Nevada deserts and we practice diving under school desks when sirens wail. Way before Nam, the blues against the golds, fighting for points in foot races and rope pulls, penalties for foul language and sloppy beds, bunkmate against bunkmate. I'm hiding behind enemy lines, the only Jew of 300 boys, feeling neither golden nor blue, but maybe white, eager to surrender, more taken with lanyards and toy boats of pine scraps and pipe cleaners than waging war, a time of life when the greatest ambition is to blend in, to be just average and not draw attention, not like my perfect 2-point layup once in gym class for the wrong team. I tell people that this next poem arose one night at 4 o'clock in the morning when I couldn't get to sleep. And I was going through an itinerary of everything I had heard that day, and one of them was that as we age, our nose and ears continue to grow. And that was the beginning of this poem, which I call A Letter to My Nose. Let's be honest. It's been a difficult relationship. Siblings joined at the face since birth, and you always charging into a room full of strangers one step ahead of me, introducing yourself to all the guests before I've said a word. Embarrassing, really, how brazen you are. standing naked and unabashed, just breathing silently and all eyes upon you. I shrink in your presence. Although it hasn't always been that way, old photos reveal a normal childhood where you had found an appropriate place, grazing in a field of freckles on my handsome face. But as we aged, some deep dysfunction drove you to assert yourself. Was it something I said? Frostbite? Too much pot smoke? I'll never know why things got really ugly as you enlarged without my knowledge. At the same time, the rest of me was diminishing. A betrayal, unforgivable to this day. But family is family. And I can't deny that we have to live together. So if it's not too late, let's call a truce and begin a reconciliation. I want to believe we can be beautiful again. I'll start with this poem as a tribute to all the breathing you've done for me without fail, even in dreams, with my faceless body floating over foreign landscapes, on galactic voyages that could have taken my breath away. Well, as Rennie said, I have a very strong connection with the country of Nepal, and started 20 years ago. And on one of the first trips, I wrote this poem to really try to give a sense of how the people and places and sensual experience have been there really inspired me. I call this poem Another Country. When living in another country, listen for the murmur of child monks running late for lessons with their song of slapping sandals by an early morning window. Follow the weathered gaze of an old woman walking deep in prayer around a whitewashed temple. Wander in the dawn-lit trails of her canyoned face. Spread this mountain village through your fingers, braiding its lustrous strands into a thick cloak of cedar smoke, wet slate, and mustard oil. Soak in every moment. Let your skin of paper dissolve in a steady, warm drizzle of attention to the 10,000 sensations. On one trip to Nepal, my wife and I happened to be there for the equivalent of Nepal's Arab Spring, an amazing experience for us. Over 1 million people poured into the streets, and there could have been a bloodbath, but at the last minute, the army and the king backed down, and there were celebrations in the street. It was an amazing experience, and on that same trip, we also visited a home for disabled children where there was a little girl who also inspired us, and her name was Deepika. So this poem is called Deepika's Walk. 8 years since this moth flew too close to a cooking fire, melting her baby feet into candle stubs. A finer flame burns in her hot, fierce face each new morning as Deepika walks. Scraped and bruised, stiff and clumsy, with a perilous gait across a gravel yard. But also, watch the warm beam of her hazel eyes, dancing a gleaming, leaping stride, bouncing beyond rooftops this morning as Deepika walks. Or if this were night, Deepika would glow her bright, blinking breakfast anytime, neon smile. Step inside now under that smile, as if settling in a warm booth with fresh coffee and homemade pie. You might never see her again, might never again visit this city, might even miss down street an entire nation stumbling out of fire onto its feet this morning as Topeka walks. I have a real love, among other things, of geological formations. I love to look at rock and the shape and form of layers of rock. And one great place to see that is on one of Vermont's tallest mountains, Camel's Hump, where the rock is folded in odd shapes. And one day it inspired me to think about other forms of cultural transformation. I call this huevos revueltos. Coarse bands of hard granite, once flat as sea bottom, now fold and arch like elephant skin on a bare rock mountain named for the back of a foreign beast, draped and curled in graceful curves, proof enough of nature's enduring patience in softening even the hardest places. Even this gritty town near my birth, where old world neighbors greet dark-skinned newcomers with grinding suspicion, and where the subtle shift and bending of bedrock might easily be missed one Sunday morning in a local diner as a friendly waitress seats shy Salvadorans trying their first meal out in America. How do you say scrambled in Spanish? I'm learning, she smiles. Huevos revueltos. Huevos revueltos. About 4 years ago in Vermont, we suffered the catastrophe of Tropical Storm Irene, which affected the area where I come from in central Vermont pretty severely. And it was amazing to me to see how everything could change in just a matter of a few hours. And as you'll see from this poem, it also made me think about a particular friend who was suffering from beginnings of Alzheimer's. It's called After the Flood. It's soon forgotten exactly where in the scrambled landscape the graceful willow or rambling farmhouse stood the same way Buzz puzzles at the washed-out bridge in his memory that now separates him from our conversation seconds ago. There's no return once the storm rips its path through the familiar. If only the past could be dredged like the tons of gravel they shoved from the bottom of Route 4, hauled 6 miles back up the mountain from where it had poured down just days before, then paved to patch the canyon-sized gash in a highway artery. But the heart has no such heavy machinery. What's lost can only be worked by hand, a spadeful at a time, in the one private garden we each carefully tend. And this poem is for the man I was just mentioning in the previous poem, Buzz, who was part of a breakfast club. We would meet every 2 weeks as his memory started to fade. So this poem is Breakfast with Buzz. Our scrambled conversation runs like the sifting of bargain bins at a rummage sale for cheap stories. ones we hope might endure beyond breakfast, beyond the fringe of his fading memory. I'm busy scanning my own headlines for some startling news worth impressing friends at this table. Something to outlast the forgettable food, but today I'm just finding comics. No sensational rescues or brilliant op-eds, only bland humor dished out with weak porridge, minus the real battles buried on my back page, which is all Buzz still reads these days. His bold-faced name tag banner headline, I still am. Moving on from grief and loss to some lighter moments, remembering growing up with a father who was a dentist, and the fact that the office was in our house, and my memories of that time above the dental office. From school each day, I'd return to a room above the office of my dentist father, over the piercing whine of molars filled and whimpering pleas of children trapped like cornered animals, and my father's voice, so caring and calm and soothing as mint, all drifting up through ceiling cracks with strains of music in a muted soundtrack for coming of age on warm afternoons of salacious groping with a chain-smoking girlfriend who soon would leave me alone in despair, scorned for spitting each time I French-kissed her full, luscious mouth. Disgust and desire and the shriek of the drill all throbbing together in the air of a room where I first learned it's possible to live with pain, or at least lie down a few feet above it. So here's a poem that was inspired by an actual event in our lives. I call it Jesus of Comcast. When our phone first went dead, I reached out in despair to customer service on live chat. Hello, came the instant message. This is Jesus. How can I help you? Now, I know what you're thinking, but please don't go there. Although it crossed my mind too, the shortest straw of a doubt that indeed I might have once been blind, but now could see gentle hands hovering over our 100-year-old house and its slender thread to the World Wide Web. Yet, whether from Oaxaca or Nazareth, a miracle truly did settle upon us that evening in a subtle shift of electrons. The phone resurrected, our sins relieved. And outside, in the cold, crisp fall night, bushels of bright stars hung like ripe harvest fruit, while back inside, faith restored. You and a vintage red wine stood beckoning again, full-bodied and brilliant. I wrote this poem called Virgin Mary for my wife, whose name happens to be Mary. Her favorite figurine, now a sad pile of broken blue and white porcelain heaped on the counter, and my wife implores a resurrection be performed by me, a simple Jew armed only with superglue and trepidation. But setting mind and jaw squarely to the task of all mankind, I do manage restoring her slightly cracked, sly smile to its proper place. The same smile that smashed me open over 30 years ago, still thrilling in random glances over a sandwich or pillow. And though we've been broken a few times, as may happen to most things brittle when hit by something hard, the scattered china always beckons us to the bare floor on bent knees, searching eye to eye under chair and table for the missing piece with jagged hands, sparkling blue and white and soft in prayer. Here's a poem that I wrote that has a lot to do with trust. 3 years ago, I started mentoring a boy in our area who's only 10 years old, who came from a rather troubled background. And it was when we were beginning to get to know each other, I call this poem Snakeskin. A snakeskin is only a snakeskin until given to the 10-year-old who has barely begun to trust in you. He too may shed some doubts like translucent scales from his troubled heart, and peel you too with his searching look back to something forgotten but true in nature's fragile design, held weightless and shimmering in his restless young eyes. Someday, you pray, with grace and ease, you both may shed these clumsy skins in tall, lush grass and slip away. Tractor Man. 15 summers I've passed you on the same stretch of dirt road back behind the third branch of the White River. A bedraggled lump of wild beard and splayed knees stuffed onto your tiny, worn-out lawn tractor stuck in first gear. Sputter crawling 4 miles from town to a hard scrabble farmhouse with empty barn and hayfields long gone to seed. I go there to run, to coax another season's cycle from an aging body, slowed down a notch each year, loping by without a word, my hand tossed out in a humble wave, hardly masking a smug sense of agility and superior fitness. So we pass. And time passes, both the hare and the tortoise, slumped further into your John Deere shell, beard grown shaggier, though in my heart I know we shall cross the same finish line, you and I, someday with our perfect bodies and breathless faces, glowing pink with purpose and pride, a job well done. I have a friend who started a second family he was quite old, and lo and behold, he had twins. And one day I checked in with him to see how things were going. I asked, and he looked at me rather tired and said, "They're bouncing. They bounce from the moment they get up to the moment they go to sleep." I started thinking of that energy, and this poem emerged, which I call Playground. Consider the child who awakens happy, primed and charged to seize the gift of each new day. Watch how the sun excites her and her friends, bouncing, bruised and battered like free electrons, undeterred by solid objects. Imagine the origin of our universe, the cosmic burst of nascent energy expanding out past countless galaxies to these pink-faced, laughing, pigtailed specks of scattered stardust swirling through the maple-slanted morning light. This final poem, called Yukon Territory, takes me back 40 years or so to a brief time where I was in the far north of Canada. And it became an inspiration for lots of writing that I've done, thinking about the fact that often we wonder how we got to where we are, and we can only tell by looking back. So I'm going to read now the final poem, Yukon Territory. A destination first takes shape in the mouth, syllables rolled together like gold nuggets in a sluice box, and gathered into a feast of dust-choked highway until one evening you find yourself alone outside a mine shaft on night shift. Your hard hat beam no match for a burst of northern lights and wolf howls. You are in the spring of your life. Your name still a destination for others yet to be born, with only a lunchbox at midnight to tide you over to another Arctic dawn. How is it that 2 feet can track through 1 billion stars so the eyes may follow later? Look now, where you've been, where you once thrashed through thick brush like a grazing animal. It's all that remains. This trampled grass, a taste of precious metal.
Danny, thank you for that gorgeous reading. I feel as if we have soaked in the 1,000 or 10,000 sensations of gorgeous words and images and people. And we will long remember Deepika, who stands for all the children of Nepal who have been through so much as their country has also been through so much. The waitress at a diner learning to say the Spanish word for scrambled eggs, and a chain-smoking girl kissing above the sound of the drilling from the dental office below, and a child careening like wild electrons. Wonderful stuff. Thank you for that beautiful reading.
Thanks.
And thanks also to Ken Picard and Karen Handville, who make this program possible. And if you would like to learn more about Danny Dober's poetry, please have a look at the Antrim House website, antrimhousebooks.com, where you may also be interested in other Antrim House authors whose lives and works are described there. Goodbye for now until we meet again for the 33rd installment of Speaking of Poetry.